I'm Dave Thomas, and today I am building the Bullet Bobby model rocket from Launch Lab Rocketry. This is the first of all of their kits that I've tried here, so this will be a little bit of a new experience for me. As always, we want to go through and make sure we have all the parts. And so here we have a small parts package that contains centering rings. This is a vinyl decal, it looks like, and hardwood fins. Another package contains the shock cord, engine clip, engine mount, thrust ring, launch lug, fin marking guide, swivel, that's always nice to see. Alright, and decals there. Okay, 12-inch nylon parachute, main body tube. Alright, then we have the nose cone and some nose weight here. Don't throw this away. This is going to be important for keeping the model stable in flight. Okay, and we'll come back here, make sure we're not missing anything. Alright, looks like everything is here. I'm going to clear away most of this and we'll get started. Our first step is to assemble the motor mount, and so we're going to need parts from two of these bags. Alright, so we'll need the two centering rings out of this bag. Alright, and then we'll need the motor mount tube and clip right there. And also the thrust ring. Just like that. And we'll put the rest of this stuff away for now. Okay, so we are going to make a few marks. Alright, so we're going to make a mark at 3 millimeters from one end. There. And then another mark at 3.8 centimeters. It'll be right there. And a third mark at 6.4 centimeters. It's going to be right there. Okay. So this is going to be the forward end, this is going to be the aft end, and I'm going to write inside my body tube, or my motor mount tube here, then aft, so I don't get this turned around later. Alright, now we're going to cut a slit at the 6.4 centimeter mark here, and this just needs to be wide enough for the motor mount clip to fit in, so that should just pop in like that. Okay, and then we're going to put some masking tape around the entire tube here, centered on our 3.8 centimeter mark. And you can use 2 wraps here if you want, even more. And this is just going to keep the engine clip from coming loose. Okay, and then they say we can even coat that with a thin layer of glue. I think I'll do that after I get the centering rings on. Okay, first we're going to put in the thrust ring. Now they say to put the glue in the tube first, and normally you would do that for couplers and things like this. The problem with doing that is when you put the ring in here, and I'm going to dry fit this, it pushes the glue down ahead of it, and that could end up with glue down inside the motor mount tube, and we don't want that. So I'm going to change this just a little bit, and I'm going to apply the glue to the ring itself. In this way, excess glue gets pushed toward the forward end and not down into the motor mount itself. So now just pop that in there, like that. Okay, and I'm just going to wipe off that excess glue there. And now I'm going to lift it. So you can see it's a little bit tilted. I'm going to make that even. There we go. And set that just for a moment while I remove the glue from my fingers. Okay, and then we have two rings here. The one with the notch in the edge is going to go on the forward end here. And I am just going to dry fit this first of all. Okay, and that should go right up to where the clip inserts. And this notch, that notch doesn't matter where it goes. Okay, just for convenience, I'm going to have it in line with the clip itself. And then the aftering here has the notch on the inside, and that's going to go over the clip there. Okay, and that is going to go at that little mark. Okay, I almost covered it with my clip here. I'm just going to extend that out a little bit. So that's our 3mm mark there. Okay, so now that I know both of those are going to fit, okay, so I'm going to start by just adding a bead of glue here at the forward edge. I'm going to take my centering ring, that back on there, into the glue. There we go. Just kind of rotate that into position once more. Okay, and then this bead of glue here, I'm just going to smooth into a fillet. Okay, and then I'm going to place a fillet all the way around the forward edge there. Smooth that in. Alright, now I've got some excess glue. I can go ahead and stick that on the tape here. It probably doesn't matter if you do this step at all, but it's in the instructions, so we'll do it. Okay, and now we just want to make sure that it's pretty perpendicular to the tube there. Alright, now down on the other edge, I'm going to do the same thing. Except I don't want to get the glue on the motor clip. Down here. So once we get there, okay, and I'm going to move that to that 3mm position. Okay, I'm going to smooth that around there. Okay, and over here on the inside, smooth that into a fillet as well. Again, don't get it up on the clip. Alright, now we're going to adjust this. Okay, and I'm going to add just a little bit more glue so that I can form a fillet around the aft end there. Okay, got any excess glue there, just smooth it out. Alright, now I'm going to let that completely dry before we try to insert it into the body tube. While we're waiting for the glue to dry on the motor mount, we can start preparing the fins. and these were in one of the small packages. These are hardwood, probably basswood fins, or basswood fins, whichever you like. Alright, and so the instructions say to go ahead and first of all stack these all together uniformly, and then take some sandpaper, put that on your work surface, and you're going to drag all of the edges here over that to make sure they're smooth. I'm starting with 120 grit sandpaper. Anything between 100 and 150 should work fine. And we're just going to sand all the edges at once there. Basically you want to get rid of the soot on them, so it should be close to natural wood color again. Okay, and now I'm going to put this on a sanding block, just a piece of wood here, and we're going to sand the faces of each fin in the same direction as the grain. Now these have a much tighter and finer grain than balsa does, and so you don't necessarily need to use any type of sanding sealer on these. They also say you don't really need to round the leading and trailing edges, because something to keep in mind is that this is not an extremely aerodynamic rocket to begin with. It's mostly for show, and so you're not going to gain a whole lot of altitude by rounding the fins here on the leading edges. And by not rounding it, you do increase the strength a little bit. So on mine, I'm just going to have squared edges here. I'm just going to have to push this rocket through the atmosphere a bit more. I am going to seal the faces, though, with a spray-on filling sandable primer. Now you can get this, most of the major manufacturers have these. I know both Krylon and Rust-Oleum have them, although they're often in the automotive section rather than in the paint section of stores. So if you can't find it, check around there. So I'm going to take these off camera and spray them with that filler. And it does essentially the same thing as sanding sealer. It's going to fill in the grain here, and then after we sand it, the high spots will still have the color of the wood, the low spots will show the primer. So I'll come back after that's all done. While we're waiting for the glue to dry on the motor mount, we can go ahead and mark the body tube for the fins. And so here, this fin alignment guide is in the small parts package with the parachute. And so they suggest taking some masking tape here and taping down one end of this. Alright, and then we're going to wrap this around. Alright, and line up the arrows there. My arrows are a little bit covered, but I can still see them. Okay, and then we'll take another piece of masking tape and tack that down. Okay, and then we're going to mark at the arrows here where the fins and launch lug go. Okay, now this one with the LL is the launch lug. And I'm just going to write LL next to it there. Not very legibly, but I'll know it's not a fin. Alright, then we'll take that back off, set it aside. Okay. Alright, now we're going to draw lines between those, and they say to use a ruler. You can do that. It's easier to stick this on a door frame or a drawer edge, or in my case here using an actual tube marking guide. Now this is a bit bigger than most model rocket diameters, so you may have a little bit trouble finding a place that'll do it and have to go back to using the ruler there. Alright, but here I'm just going to connect these down into the aft end for the fins. Now for the launch lug, I'm going to draw it all the way along the length, and that just makes it easier to align things. There we go. Okay, and then we're going to sand these a little bit just to make it easier to attach the fins and the launch lug. Now the fins extend off about halfway. Since the fins are actually going to extend down below the body tube here, I'm just going to sand about half the length of my fin line. And it's just a few strokes, and this just helps the glue attach better. Alright, and I'm going to look ahead here. The launch lug, there we go. Alright, and okay, and so the launch lug is going to fit right here between the two marks. And so we'll go ahead and do that entire length there. Okay. So now we're going to have to wait for the motor mount to finish drying, as well as the fin treatments to be dry enough to sand. So we'll come back when we're ready to do that. My motor mount is dry, and so now we're ready to put this in. And the first thing I'm going to do here is just dry fit it and make sure we don't hang up anywhere. Okay, it's a little bit snug right there. So if it's not going in easily, then go ahead and take your sandpaper and just sand the edges a little bit here. Now before we glue this in, we need to attach the shock cord. So grab that out of the small parts package here. This is a Kevlar shock cord. So what we're going to do here is simply tie this around the motor mount tube. And I'm going to put a double knot in that. Okay, now this free end you want shorter than the radius there of the centering ring, so it doesn't get caught when we're trying to put this in. So I'm just going to cut that back. And Kevlar is notoriously difficult to cut, which is why it's used in personal body armor and such. Alright, try the hobby knife here. It's a lot easier to do this if you actually have space to get it against another object like the mat here. Okay, we'll just glue that remaining piece down. Alright, so we're going to pull this around to that slot and pull it through there, and then all this material here we're just going to glue into place. So I'm just going to apply some glue, and basically we're going to embed the shock cord in the glue. And so that frayed bit there will just get put in. Okay, and if you got excess there, you can wipe that off with some tissue. Having a lot of excess isn't going to make it any stronger, but it will make it heavier. Okay, so now we're going to put a ring of glue up inside the body tube here, 2 inches long, or 2 inches up inside. So again, I'm going to use an applicator for this. Actually, I still got this one here. And what I can do now is take my ruler, right, and measure from the tip of my applicator down, and I'll put my thumbnail at that 2-inch mark. Alright, now I'm going to get some glue on there. Alright, I'm going to slide this in, not touching the body tube until I get to my thumb mark there. And now I'm going to go all the way around. Alright, we want a fairly heavy bead of glue there. So I'm going to do that one more time so we get a uniform amount. Okay, and now I'm going to slide this in part way. Now before I do, to keep the shock cord out of the way, I'm going to put the shock cord down through the motor mount and out the aft end. Okay, now I want my engine clip to be on the same side as my launch lug, so I'm going to put that in here. Alright, but I'm only going to move that up about halfway, and then I'm going to put another ring of glue right inside the edge of the body tube here. Alright, and it's okay if it falls down like that, it's not going to hurt anything. Alright, but now we're going to slide this in and try and do it all in one motion here. So you want to do this really quickly. Okay, get all our edges down in there. Alright, and this should be, the two tubes should be flush. So I can take my ruler here and just use that as a guide. Okay, and then once this dries, if you want to, you can add a fillet around the edge there to even further reinforce it. Okay, up here on this side, most of the glue is pushed forward to make its own fillet there, but we've got a little bit down here that we can go ahead and add to. You can use your finger too, but since I've already got the applicator ready. Alright, and we'll let that dry again. While we're waiting for the motor mount to dry inside of the body tube, we can go ahead and put together the nose cone and recovery system. Alright, now this does require weight in the nose to keep it stable, although in the instructions they say to add about half of it first, launch it, see if it's stable or not, and then if needed add more to it. I would not recommend using a launch as a means of testing stability. Do a swing test if you need to. I'm simply going to err on the side of caution and add the whole thing. So you can just take this out. If you want to do it with the instructions, break this in half, install it, and then check your stability. Again, preferably with a swing test rather than a launch. And then add more if you need it. Okay, so I'm just going to take the first half here and I'm going to squash that down. Alright, the instructions then suggest putting a piece of masking tape across this, do your stability check, and then come back. As I said, I'm just going to err on the side of caution. I'm going to add the whole thing. Alright, now since this is a 3D printed nose cone, it's got a fairly rough interior, and it really should hold this without much other intervention. In fact, this is going to stick better to the plastic than the masking tape would. Okay, and in fact, if you don't mind adding a little extra weight and you really want that to stay in place, you can add a layer of epoxy over that. I'm just going to leave it the way it is for now. I might come back and do epoxy a little bit later. Next we have the parachute and recovery system. Okay. Now, if you've seen my other videos, you know that I like to use snap swivels to attach parachutes and such, but in the kit they're using it in kind of the opposite direction. So generally I attach the swivel portion here to the parachute itself and then use the snap portion to fit into the shock cord. All right, they're doing it the opposite way. So here they've got the shock cord with the swivel on it, and then they tie a loop in the parachute and attach it this way. Okay, and that, since most of my other parachutes have it going the other direction, I'm going to do the same thing here. That makes them interchangeable. All right, whichever way you do it, you'll need to find the center point of the parachute and of the shroud lines here. Alright, so these are all attached corner to corner with adjacent corners there. So the first thing to do is on one finger get all of the loops of the shroud lines there, and then in the other finger find the center of the parachute and then pull everything tight. Okay, and if they're all the right lengths, all those corners should be at about the same level, and they are. If they're not, you can adjust the relative lengths of your shroud lines, or maybe readjust where you're actually holding this until you get to that point. Okay, now if you want to do it their way, what you would do at this point is grab these shroud lines, tie a knot in them, just an overhand knot, leaving a loop, giving you something like this. Okay, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to do what I usually do with these guys. So I'm going to take all my loops and get them pinched down like this. Okay, and I'm going to take my snap swivel and I'm going to put all those loops through the swivel side, like that. Now, one other thing you can do here, if you like, to help kind of control the shroud lines, is take a little piece of heat shrink tubing like this, and before you put the swivel on, put this over the shroud lines. Alright, then regather them. Alright, put all those through. Now I'm just going to move that heat shrink tubing out of the way for the moment. Alright, now open all of the loops again here so that they're all going the same way. Alright, my swivel's hanging down, so I'm going to push the swivel up all through those loops. Alright, and I'm going to pull the loops down like this, and I'm just going to pull the whole thing taut. Okay. Now, if you're not using the heat shrink tube, you can just put a little dab of glue on this to hold that knot in place. But before you do that, come back and check that your shroud lines are still all the correct length, and mine are. If they've slipped somewhere in there, then you can just loosen this up and try the whole thing again. Alright, now, since I have my heat shrink tube here, I am not going to put any glue on this. I'm just going to put that heat shrink up until it covers the knot there. Alright, now we still want the swiveling spot to work fine, so don't put it up too far. And now I'm going to carefully heat this. I'm just going to use a low flame on a butane lighter here. Just don't hold it in one spot for very long. So you want to shrink the tube, not burn it. The advantage to this is, one, it looks nice, but also if you do need to change it for some reason, maybe you broke the swivel or something like that, you can simply take a hobby knife and slit this open and completely take it apart again, instead of having to cut out a spot where you might have glued it. Alright, and the trick here is to keep it moving, because we don't want to melt the shroud lines. We don't want to burn the shrink tubing. There we go. Alright, so it just goes together like that. Now, if we look here, the way this will attach, the way they have it is they snap from the shock cord into the eyelet here, and then they also have the parachute over this as well. Alright, now since I did that opposite, what I'm going to do is I will tie the shock cord to this eyelet, and then I can attach the parachute either to the eyelet as well, or I can attach it to the shock cord by tying a loop in it. Now the shock cord on this is not very long, so I'll probably go ahead and tie it into the loop here. Alright, but for now we can set these aside as well, and we're still waiting on some glue. So the next thing I'm going to do is bring back the fins that have been primed here, and we'll do some sanding on those in preparation for attaching them to the body. Here are the fins after they've been sprayed with the sandable filling primer. And so now I'm going to go back and use some 220 grit sandpaper to knock that down. Now I'll warn you that this type of primer does clog up sandpaper really quickly, so you may want to have some extra on hand. So here I'm still sanding in the direction of the grain, and what's happening is that the high stuff, where most of the primer is being sanded away, and then the low spots, you can see like little stripes in there, that's where the primer is remaining and filling in the grain. But you can see here that's already starting to clog up the sandpaper. So there's still some to be sanded down here, a little bit on this side too. And this is a treatment that you can repeat if you want to. So depending on how porous your fins are and how smooth you want them to be at the end, you can go back and spray another coat of the primer on here, let it dry, and sand it off again. Okay, so off camera I'm going to finish up this little bit here, and then do the same thing to the rest of the fins, and then come back. My fins are sanded, and if you didn't use any type of fin treatment, this is where you should be next. So we're going to come up here back to step 2, and we're going to mark the fins here at 1 inch or 25 millimeters from the very tip there. Move that up a little bit. Okay, and you're going to mark this on the fin, just like that. We're going to do this to all of them. You can mark both sides if you want, but you at least need that first side marked, because this is how far they're going to hang off of the body tube. So unlike most model rockets where the entire root edge is glued to the body tube, only about half of this one will be. And this really makes the fins probably the weakest part of the rocket. We're going to want to reinforce them really well. Okay, now we'll take our body tube here, and I've pulled the shock cord back up through the motor mount. Alright, and remember we gave it a little bit of light sanding there. So now what we'll do is take our glue, and you definitely want wood glue for this step. The stronger the better. Someone might even make an argument for using epoxy here. Now I've got a little bit of my primer here, so I'm just going to take some rougher sandpaper here, as I'm not interested in the finish. I just want to get that stuff off. So I want nice bare wood in here. Alright, and now I'm going to add a fairly thin, even bead of glue here. Okay, this is actually a case where if you use a lot of glue, it's going to take a lot longer for the fin to dry. It means a lot longer before you can handle it. Alright, and now using my mark, that's going to be flush with the end of the body tube. I'm going to apply this to my line, and I'm going to pull it back off again. And now I'm going to wait for about 60 seconds. Now the instructions say to wait up to about 3 minutes. That's actually a bit too long. Alright, but for about 60 seconds, and then we'll put this back on. About a minute has passed, and during that time my glue has become tacky. So now I'm going to put this right back on there. Squeeze that on. And now I'm going to check and make sure that we're aligned with the line here, and then also perpendicular to the tube. And now I'm going to let that dry for at least 10 minutes, and then we'll go on to the remaining 3 fins and install those in the same way. Here I have all the fins on, although the glue is still drying, but I'm going to go ahead and add the launch lug so that I can just close things down for the evening. And so the launch lug is a standard 1/8 inch one, and I'm just going to roughen its surface just like we did for the body tube. Now you can use sandpaper, I just happen to have this emery board handy. Okay, and then just like we did with the fins, we'll put on a thin film of glue. Okay, and that can go in between the 2 marks that we made there. If you want, you can put it all the way down flush with the bottom. It won't hurt anything. Alright, but now I'm going to align that with the line and then sight down the rocket. So everything should be nice and parallel. Alright, and then I'm going to set this aside to continue drying. The glue on my fins and on my launch lug is dry. And here I've kind of wrapped up the shock cord just to stuff it out of the way there. Okay, and if we look at the back here, everything is pretty much aligned. Pretty good for a freehand job, I think. So now we're going to add the fillets. I'm going to start with the launch lug here. Just run a bead of glue along each side. And I've got paper towels handy here as I'm going to be wiping a lot of glue. So now I just take my finger, smooth that in, and remove the excess glue. And then I'm going to do that for the fins. Now I like to do 2 facing fins at the same time. Okay, and in the case of this rocket, it's really critical to have strong fillets. And so you may want to add more to these. If that's the case though, let the first layer dry and then add another layer if that's what you want to do. And the instructions say to even try and reinforce this back in here. And it's kind of, I'm not getting a whole lot down in there. And there's not really a whole lot you can do there. But just make sure that your fillet goes all the way down to the edge of the body tube. And I'm going to let this dry in a horizontal position, and then we'll come back. While the fillets are drying, I'm looking ahead toward the finishing of the rocket here. And they actually give two options here, what they call the quick way, in which you just assemble everything, paint it with several coats of gloss black enamel, and then add the decals to it. Now, the eye decal here is going to go onto the nose cone, and because of the 3D print lines there, it may not adhere as well. And so if we go down to the not so quick way, they're going to have us use a filler on this with repeated sanding to smooth all this out, and that will give a better surface for the decals to adhere to. So I'm going to go with that. I'm going to use the same filler primer that I used on the fins on the nose cone here. And then also, once the fillets are dry, I'll start the painting of the main body there using a black primer, and then going on to a gloss black finish, or maybe a dark blue, or could even be a metallic finish there. I'm kind of toying with the idea of using a gold or brass finish there to make this look like a cartridge. But I've got a little bit of time to make up my mind on that. So right now I'm going to start by filling in the grooves here and doing some sanding, and then I'll come back. Here's the nose cone after several coats of the filler primer here. You can see it has filled in some of the spaces here. Now I'm going to wet sand this, starting with some 120 grit sandpaper, and that's going to remove most of the primer again, but leave primer inside the ridges here. And then after that, I'll add some more primer, sand it again with finer sandpaper, probably 220, and then just keep repeating that until this is completely smooth. Here's what the nose cone looks like after that initial sanding with the 120 grit sandpaper. And you can really see here how it works. So the grooves within the plastic still contain the primer there. The ridges, though, the primer has been sanded off, as has at least some of the plastic there. And so this is going to go back under the fume hood to get some more primer applied to it. I'm just going to keep repeating this until I get a smooth finish. Here's my nose cone after a second round of primer. And you can see here it's much smoother. You can still see a little bit of lining here and a little bit down here. So I will take this once again and wet sand that down. And that's probably going to be enough for me. If you want a perfectly smooth finish, you can just repeat this until you get it. But I think after a sanding and then the application of some white primer to this, it's going to look pretty smooth there. I've given this another wet sanding with 220 grit sandpaper. And again, you can see that the grooves have been filled in and the ridges have been sanded down again. Now this does still have a little bit of ridginess to it. You can feel it with your finger here. It's really noticeable as you can hear it in the sandpaper when you sand it. But as I mentioned earlier, I think just another coat of regular primer here is going to be enough for this. Back on our main body tube, my fillets have dried. I've got a couple little bubbles here along the launch lug fillet, but it looks like all the fin fillets have come out really well. Now on this one, just because there is going to be potentially so much strain right here, I'm going to go ahead and put another layer of fillets on, and then let that dry before we get ready to prime and paint the rocket itself. Once again, we'll go ahead and let this dry horizontally, and as long as all the fillets come out okay, we will start painting on this very soon. The second layer of fillets has dried, and so this is ready to be primed. I've stuffed the forward end of the rocket with tissue here just so we don't get paint all over the shock cord or down into the motor mount. And then I'm going to use this painting stick that I simply made out of an old engine casing and a dowel. And that'll go up in here. Okay, and now I'll be able to paint this without getting my hands all painted, while at the same time protecting the inside of the rocket kit. Here's the main part of the rocket, and this has had 2 coats of white primer sprayed onto it. And you can see there I've got some runs in it. That's okay, we'll sand those out. But this will need to dry for about 24 hours before I can sand it. Here I have the nose painted copper and the main body painted a gold or a brass here. And so, as you can see, I decided to go with the actual cartridge motif here. So when these go together, we should have something that looks like about a .45 bullet. I'm going to let these dry for 24 hours, and then we'll come back and put the decals on and do the final assembly. Here my paint is finished. Now, one of the drawbacks to using metallic paint is it really shows off mistakes and imperfections. So you can see a little bit of remnant ridges there on the nose cone. But overall, this came out pretty good. So we've got a gold main body and a copper tip there. And so our last thing to do here is to put on the decals, and then we can just assemble everything. So the first decal here I'm going to do, it goes back here on the aft end like that. And all of the decals on this are made of self-adhesive vinyl. So one of the neat things about vinyl decals is that you can make them easily movable and replaceable by dipping them in a solution of water with just a drop of dishwashing detergent. So that's what I have here. It's just room temperature water and a drop of generic dish soap. So we just need to peel off the decal, and this is usually the hardest part. Alright, so what I'm going to do is peel this off and then just quickly dip it in the water. And what this does is it temporarily removes the adhesive properties of the sticker, or at least decreases them, and that makes it easy to reposition this if you need to. And then once you've got it down, just squeegee out the water, and you can use a tissue or a small rag for this. Now I do recommend you wait at least 24 hours before flying these so that it has time to re-adhere. For the rest of the decals, they're on this sheet here, and this has a backing sheet which will expose the adhesive of the decal, and it also has this positioning sheet on top. And this is kind of like masking tape. It allows us to keep these in line. So for example, these stripes here are like this, and so they're pre-positioned in how far they should be apart. So we'll cut these apart, apply them, and then remove that top masking layer. Alright, so this does take a little bit more care. So we want to take off the backing. Alright, now the actual decals are still adhered there. And these do have just a little bit of a left and a right position to them. Okay, that looks like it should be okay. Okay, so this is going to be lined up basically with this fin here. Once you have them where you want them, then we'll go ahead and peel off the top layer here. Kind of peel it back on itself. It'll help prevent it from pulling the decal off. So we'll do the same type of thing with the rest of the decals here, and again, be careful because there's a definite left and a definite right for each one. But I'm going to do the rest of these off camera and then come back. Here I have all the decals on. So if we look at this in profile here, it looks very much like the illustration on the kit. All right, so I'm going to open this back up here. And we need to attach the shock cord. Alright, and what they recommend is first tying a loop in the shock cord here, just a little ways down. So I'm just going to do that right here. Just tie a loop like that, and this is where the parachute will attach. And then put the other end through the loop in the nose cone there. Now I'm a little bit leery of that. I hope it doesn't break. You might want to consider reinforcing it with a little bit of epoxy. Alright, here I'm just going to tie a double knot or 2 half hitches there. And then I'm going to take just a little dab of super glue. Apply that to the knot so it can't come unraveled. Also up here in this fuzzy area. Okay, and you want to make sure that this free end here doesn't get caught between the shoulder and the body tube, because if it does, it may not eject, and then this will become deadfall bomb bobby. And then our last thing to do is to attach the parachute here. Alright, and remember I did my snap swivel a little bit differently than the instructions. In the instructions, the snap swivel would have been tied into the loop here on the swivel side, and then the snap would be used to attach to the parachute shroud lines. Now in the instructions it shows how to pack this for launch. You do need quite a bit of wadding because it's such a wide body tube here, but also because it's so short you've got to be able to pack this all in right. I'm not going to put the wadding in, but just to give you a general idea. Alright, first we would put several sheets of crumpled wadding in here, keeping the shock cord out of the way. Alright, and then we would take our parachute here, fold it, alright, and then that's going to go into the nose cone like this. And this is part of the reason why we have the loop in here, is so that at ejection this will help pull it out and not just leave it in there. And then we would also put some more wadding on top of this, and then we'd sandwich the shock cord between the two layers of wadding. Alright, and then put this on. Alright, and you can align the eyes there however you want them. A little cockeyed there. Let's try this. Okay, and then you want to do a shake test like this to make sure it doesn't come out. On mine here, I didn't do anything to the ridges from the 3D printing, so that's holding it fairly well. It's got a little initial slippage there, but then it stops, so that's fine. If your nose cone does not stay put, though, if it slides out easily, just go ahead and add some masking tape here to the shoulder. And you don't necessarily have to wrap it all the way around. I would start with like half a circumference, check it again, and then try again. So you shouldn't be able to shake the nose cone loose easily, but you should be able to remove it fairly easily. Okay, so if it's way too stiff and it takes a lot of effort to do that, you may need to do a little bit of sanding there. All right, so that's my completed bullet bobby. This is an interesting kit, and kind of a cute one as well. Hope you had a good time building this with me. Have a great flight and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.